Welcome to the iFire story. I'm Ethan, and I've spent the past 18 years married to Rachel. Our daughter, Sophia, is 15 years old. I am employed as a mechanical engineer at the nearby automobile factory, dedicating my days to ensuring that machinery operates seamlessly and that production remains on schedule. On a balmy, sunlit afternoon in March, I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. As I cleaned the grease from my hands, my eyes flicked to the screen, revealing Nathan, my neighbor. Unusual. He seldom reached out to me while I was working. I swiped to respond. "Ethan, it's time for you to head back home." At that moment, Nathan's voice carried a sense of urgency, teetering on the edge of panic. My stomach churned. What seems to be the issue? A moving van is parked in front of your house. Two individuals are in the process of loading furniture into it. My fingers clenched the phone tightly. What is it? Who on earth? I'm not sure, but they seem to be collecting quite a bit of things. Your spouse is present as well. I wanted to bring this to your attention. Is that you, Rachel? The rhythm of my heartbeat echoed in my ears. Do you really think so? Optimistic. Please arrive promptly. I didn't squander another moment. With my phone tucked away in my pocket, I marched across the factory floor, the sound of my boots echoing against the concrete with each purposeful step. Thoughts surged through my mind. Did this occur during the day? Or perhaps something even more dire? Upon arriving in my boss's office, I rapped gently on the door before sliding it open. "Excuse me, I must take my leave." At this moment, my supervisor, a stern yet fair individual, glanced up from his documents. "What's happening?" "My neighbor just informed me that there's been a burglary at my house. My belongings are being loaded into a moving van." His eyes grew large with surprise. "Proceed." At this moment, I chose not to linger for another utterance. I pivoted sharply and dashed toward the parking lot, my heart pounding fiercely within my chest. Struggling with my keys, I flung the car door open, leaped inside, and ignited the engine. The tires howled against the asphalt as I sped away from the lot, my hands clutching the wheel with fierce determination. I was completely unaware of what awaited me, yet there was one truth I held firmly in my mind. This was far more than a mere burglary. What about Rachel's presence? That transformed everything. I slammed the accelerator and sped toward the location. I arrived at the house, the tires howling in protest as I abruptly applied the brakes. My heart raced as I flung the car door open and marched toward the driveway. Before me stood a man, tall and lean, exuding confidence as he directed two others who were loading my furniture into the back of a moving van. "Hello," all at once, I shouted, striding toward him. The man hardly acknowledged my presence, then grumbled quietly, "Mind your damn business." That was the moment. That was everything needed. In an instant, my fist struck his jaw, and he fell hard onto the pavement. A harsh grunt broke free from his lips as he collided with the ground. Yet I was far from finished. I lunged at him, my fist striking with fury, emotions surging as I drove him into the ground. "Do you really believe you could take something that belongs to me?" I snarled, delivering another blow. Under the bright sun, yet another blow. He let out a low groan, attempting to cover his face, yet I had no intention of relenting. With one hand, I seized my phone and dialed 911, struggling to steady my breath as I spoke. "A man is taking things from my home. I have him under control," I declared, my fist still tight, poised to deliver another blow. The voice of the dispatcher carried a steady assurance, yet held an undeniable authority. "Please, kindly enter your residence and secure the door behind you. The officers are en route." I released a harsh chuckle. "I can take care of myself." Out of nowhere, a piercing scream echoed across the landscape. "Ethan, what on earth are you up to?" I turned my head and caught sight of Rachel hurrying toward us, her expression contorted in disbelief. She fell to her knees beside the man, her heart racing as she anxiously examined his face, her hands shaking as they brushed against his bruised jaw. "What prompted you to strike him?" She shouted at me, her voice brimming with indignation. I paused, briefly unsettled by her response. "Are you familiar with him?" She jerked her head up, her eyes aflame. "Indeed, he is my boyfriend." A chilling wave of disbelief washed over me. The air escaped from my lungs. "Excuse me?" That was all I could accomplish before I drove my foot directly into his groin, causing him to curl up like a dying cockroach. "You are my partner for life," I exclaimed, my voice trembling with rage. "And you actually have a boyfriend?" I struck him once more, observing his body twist in agony. Rachel let out a piercing scream. "Cease this immediately. Ethan, please cease your actions." However, I had more to say. I glanced at the moving van, my thoughts swirling. What is the purpose of this moving van being here? I insisted. The man let out a low groan, his arms wrapped around himself in a protective embrace. His silence was unsettling, prompting me to deliver another kick. A third time, merely to emphasize the point. From the periphery of my vision, I caught sight of the two men from the moving company lingering by the truck. With arms crossed and amused smirks gracing their faces, they observed the chaos as it unraveled before them. It seems they were quite captivated by the performance. In their situation, I would certainly be relishing the performance too. The sharp cry of sirens sliced through the stillness, and in no time, 2 police cars arrived at the doorstep. The officers emerged, hands poised on their holsters, absorbing the unfolding scene before them. I stood over a battered man, with Rachel crouched beside him, while the movers watched idly, resembling spectators at a boxing match. A tall, broad-shouldered officer with a stern expression swiftly approached, his hand pressing firmly against my chest to distance me from the man sprawled on the ground. "Step back, sir," he commanded. I tightened my fists but complied, stepping back, my breath still coming in heavy bursts. "I was the one who reached out to you," I stated, my tone tinged with irritation. The officer lifted an eyebrow in curiosity. "Is that really the case?" Indeed, I lost my composure. I received a call from my neighbors informing me that some individuals were loading my furniture into a van. I hurried home and spotted this guy. I pointed to the man moaning softly, still huddled on the pavement, guiding their attention. The officer glanced at Rachel, who remained on her knees, tenderly holding the man's face. Her eyes burned with fury and a hint of something deeper, perhaps remorse. "Excuse me, could you please explain what is happening here?" the officer inquired. Rachel raised her gaze, clearing her tears before responding. "This man is Jonathan Smith," she stated, her voice trembling yet resolute. "He is my boyfriend." Those words sent a familiar twist through my stomach, despite having heard them previously. Listening to her express it once more, with such clarity and without remorse, struck me like another blow to the stomach. "I'm leaving Aaron," she continued, her voice now icy, stripped of any feeling. "I'm claiming my share of the furniture." The officer redirected his attention towards me, examining my face intently. I must have appeared as bewildered as I truly felt. My thoughts spun wildly. 17 years of partnership, a shared home, a family, all diminished to this? A moving van and an insufferable man named Walter parked in my driveway. The officer adjusted his posture, preparing to speak. "Mrs. Thompson," he stated, his tone steady yet resolute. "Have you let your husband know that you are departing?" Rachel paused, uncertainty flickering in her mind. With a defiant lift of her chin, she declared, "No." The officer exhaled deeply, massaging his temple with a weary hand. "Madam, I require you to grasp a certain point." He cast a fleeting look at the moving van before redirecting his attention to her. "Before you can claim any of this furniture, you must initiate the divorce process. Once the judge decrees the division of assets, both parties will be required to endorse a legal document that enumerates the assets assigned to each individual." Rachel's complexion grew a shade lighter. "What you're doing at this moment," the officer pressed on, his voice becoming more intense, "is against the law. If your husband chooses to pursue legal action, this will be categorized as theft." Rachel's breath caught at the officer's words, her expression a mix of disbelief and irritation. She faced the two movers, her voice strained, filled with urgency. "Return everything to its place," she commanded. The men, clearly entertained by the unfolding scene, shrugged and started to haul the furniture back indoors. The officer folded his arms and spoke once more, his tone unmistakably signaling that he was finished with any foolishness. Your belongings are yours to take with you. To ensure everything flows seamlessly, I'll remain here to support you until you leave. Rachel pivoted abruptly in his direction, her gaze fiery and intense. My husband should leave, she snapped, her glare directed at me as if I were the source of the issue. I swiftly responded, "This house is my mother's, so she has no claim to it." Rachel shouted in defiance, "No, you have to go. I have every right to live here." That was the breaking point for the officer. His patience had evidently reached its limit. "Ma'am, you just tried to take something from your husband," he said, his voice laced with annoyance. "And now, when you're being offered a reasonable opportunity to leave, you wish to evict him from his own residence?" He let out a derisive laugh and dismissed it with a shake of his head. "Let's determine if your husband is interested in pursuing charges for theft." He glanced in my direction, anticipation evident in his eyes as he awaited my reply. Before I had the chance to say anything, Rachel raised her hands in exasperation. "Very well, I'll gather my things," she retorted sharply before marching indoors. I observed her departure, my thoughts grappling with the reality that the woman I had shared 17 years with, the mother of my child, had been involved with another man and had schemed to take everything from me before disappearing from my life. After a brief interval, she returned, dragging along 2 hefty suitcases. As she approached the door, I lifted a hand. "Wait a moment," I said, glancing at the officer. "I would like her bags to be checked." Rachel stood still, then gradually pivoted to confront me. Her lips parted just enough to reveal her astonishment. "Aaron, is this really how you want to treat me?" She let out a sharp hiss. "Do you not have faith in me?" That was all it required. The 2 movers, who had been silently observing the unfolding drama, suddenly erupted into boisterous laughter. The officers couldn't help but share knowing smirks, one of them shaking his head in disbelief at the absurdity of the situation. The officer in charge let out a weary sigh. "Please open the bags, ma'am," he stated with conviction. "Your husband is completely justified in his decision to check." With a fierce look, Rachel unzipped the first suitcase and moved aside. I knelt and began sifting through it. Initially, it was merely garments, yet soon, hidden among her sweaters, I discovered my laptop and phone charger. I extracted them and raised them high. She released a gentle sigh. "I require those." I released a brief, mirthless chuckle, shaking my head in disbelief. "Obtain it from your beloved," I stated with a chill. "He is able to look after you now." Rachel was gone. She gathered her belongings, brought her heart's desire along, and stepped away from my existence. Walter continued to limp from the thrashing I had administered, a fact that brought me a measure of satisfaction. However, that sense of fulfillment was fleeting. The house lay in silence, an unsettling stillness enveloping it as the weight of recent events started to settle in. Suddenly, the front door swung open. Sophia entered, her backpack casually draped over one shoulder, her brows knitted together as she surveyed the chaos around her. The furniture was only partially arranged. The suitcases were left in a state of disarray, and the movers' footprints lingered on the floor. She placed her bag on the ground and turned her gaze toward me. "Dad, what on earth occurred here?" I let out a breath, massaging my temples. "Take a seat," I urged. She patted the couch beside me and took a seat, her gaze fixed on me with anticipation. I inhaled deeply. "Your mother has made the choice to depart," I stated calmly. "She has left, accompanied by her new partner." Sophia's eyes fluttered momentarily. To my complete astonishment, she simply shrugged and replied, "Oh, you mean Walter." I faced her, my fingers clenching the whiskey glass firmly. "Hold on, you were aware of him?" She shot me a glance that suggested my question was rather foolish. "Indeed," she remarked. "My mother shared some stories about him. He is the one who captured her heart first, her singular and ultimate affection." I gazed at her, attempting to comprehend the words that had just reached my ears. The words landed with the force of a gut punch. I rose from my seat, made my way to the bar, and filled a glass with a drink, my hand unwavering even as turmoil brewed within me. Then I pivoted settling into my seat with the glass cradled in my hand. "So," I said, my voice measured and deliberate, "enlighten me further about this Walter." Sophia reclined, folding her arms across her chest. My mother often shared stories about him. She remarked with a nonchalant air, "He was her first love, and her affection for him never waned. She chose to marry you because, quite simply, you were an excellent option, a respectable individual." I released a humorless chuckle, shaking my head in disbelief. An excellent selection. That was everything I had been. Not a collaborator, not someone she cherished, simply a reliable choice. I lifted my glass to my lips and cast a glance at Sophia. "So, Sophia, do you believe your mother made the right choice in leaving me for Walter?" She acted without a moment's pause. "Indeed," she replied with a straightforward tone. "You were merely a configuration, destined to unite. They were always meant to be together. Walter departed solely because he needed to pursue his studies overseas. Now he has returned, and she truly deserves to be with him." I nodded slowly, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. "Very well," I whispered. "Quite captivating." I reclined, releasing a breath through my nostrils as the burden of everything bore heavily upon me. "So," I remarked, more to myself than to her, having shared all these years together as my partner. That was nothing short of a spectacle. For the first time, Sophia found herself pausing. A fleeting glimmer of doubt danced in her gaze. Yet, in an instant, she shrugged once more. "It's not a farce," she clarified. "Merely a temporary solution." I savored another sip of my whiskey, feeling the warmth enveloping my chest. Yet it failed to soften the chilling awareness taking root deep within me. I placed the glass on the table, my fingers drumming lightly against its surface as I absorbed all that Sophia had just shared. Thus I commenced. "If Walter had stayed, your mother would have become his wife, and you would have been his child. That would have been the ideal situation, wouldn't it?" Sophia's lips formed a gentle, wistful smile. "Indeed," she replied with unwavering certainty, as if plucked from the pages of a storybook love tale. A soft laugh escaped me as I shook my head. "Fascinating," I whispered, more to my own thoughts than to her. Suddenly, a new idea struck me. If Sophia had been aware, who else was involved in this? Who else is aware of Walter? I inquired, redirecting my attention to her once more. She hardly gave a second thought. "Oh, Grandma Kelly is aware," she remarked nonchalantly. My gaze deepened subtly. "Kelly, your grandmother?" "Indeed," I acknowledged with a nod. "Ah, so she's aware. What's the story with Grandpa Greg? Is it her husband?" Sophia gave a nonchalant shrug. "Indeed, he's aware too." I tightened my grip on the glass, my jaw set in determination, but then I took a breath and let the tension slip away. "How long have you been aware of this?" I inquired. Sophia reclined on the couch, idly toying with a stray thread on her sweater. "Approximately 6 months, I would say. Half a year. My wife, my daughter, and my in-laws, each of them was aware, and not a single one of them had uttered a word to me." I nodded once more, my thoughts racing ahead of my heartbeat. "How fascinating," I murmured gently. Then I rose to my feet. Sophia's gaze met mine, a spark of curiosity illuminating her expression. "What will you do, Dad?" she inquired. I glanced at her, a gradual smile unfolding on my face. It lacked warmth. It was not an act of kindness. It was a completely different experience. "I will provide everyone with precisely what they desire." Sophia's smile held steady as she gazed at me, her expression radiating absolute confidence. "You've done well, Dad," she remarked, her tone imbued with a strange sense of validation. "You provided Mom with all that she truly deserved. If she wishes to be with her true love, let her go freely." I inclined my head just a bit, taking in the sight of my daughter with a subtle smile of delight. Her words flowed with certainty, devoid of guilt or doubt, embodying a steadfast conviction that her mother had acted rightly. I returned the smile, measured and intentional. "Absolutely, my dear, there's no need for concern," I replied, my voice calm and comforting. "I have no plans to hinder your mother. I provided her with all that she truly deserves." I took a moment to observe her intently, and, I am committed to ensuring she receives precisely that moving forward. A spark danced in Sophia's eyes, yet her lips remained sealed. I moved in a bit closer, my hand reaching out to softly tuck a strand of her hair behind her ear. And as for you, my dear princess, I continued, my voice gentle yet resolute, you shall receive what is rightfully yours. For the briefest moment, her smile wavered. I allowed the quiet to linger between us before ultimately breaking the connection. Without uttering another word, I snatched my coat and stepped through the door. I headed directly to my attorney's office. Upon my arrival, I was certain of my desires. The receptionist welcomed me with a courteous smile, yet upon hearing my name, she promptly ushered me to my lawyer's office. Didn't expect to see you today, Ethan, Mr. Jeremy remarked, reclining in his chair. What brings you here today? I settled into my seat, my hands resting gently in my lap. I expressed my need for a divorce clearly. I required it urgently. His eyebrows arched ever so slightly. I understand, he remarked, straightening his posture. Is there something particular you're hoping to achieve with this? I leaned in, eager to take complete command of my resources. I want her reduced to precisely what the law requires, nothing beyond that. No support, no kindness, no escape routes she might exploit down the line. If she believes she deserves more, she can certainly go to Walter and request it. Jeremy nodded thoughtfully, weighing my words carefully. In detention, a sly smile crept across my face. Allow her to have Sophia. They are perfectly matched. He arched an eyebrow, yet chose not to inquire further. Very well, he remarked, swiftly taking notes. I will initiate the paperwork and advocate for a swift resolution. Considering the situation, this ought to progress quickly. Very well, I remarked, rising to my feet. Keep me in the loop. With that, I departed and made my way directly to the bank. The teller acknowledged me with a courteous nod. How may I assist you today, sir? I requested to withdraw the entirety of my joint account, sliding my identification across the counter with a deliberate motion. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, her face a mask of calm, until her gaze fell upon the balance. Her gaze darted toward me, wary. Everything, sir. I verified everything, then allowed a smirk to play on my lips. No, just leave $2. After a moment of uncertainty, she gave a slight nod. Moments later, she pushed a hefty envelope filled with cash across the counter. Would you prefer this to be counted in your presence? No need, I replied, sliding the envelope into the pocket of my coat. Onward to my workspace. I pulled into my familiar parking space, strolled through the building as if it were just another ordinary day, and headed directly to HR. Greetings, Ethan, the HR manager said to me. Is everything okay? Indeed, I replied with a grin. I simply need to revise my 401k beneficiaries. Eliminate Rachel. She blinked slowly. Absolutely, we can take care of that immediately. After completing the required paperwork, I proceeded to the next item on my agenda, contacting my insurance provider. In just a matter of minutes, Rachel was removed from every policy I held. Ultimately, I reached out to my mother. She picked up on the second ring. Ethan, is everything all right? I inhaled deeply, then released the air gradually. Mom, I mentioned I believe it's important for you to hear this from me first. My mother paused, absorbing my words after I laid everything out. Rachel's treachery, Sophia's response, the chilling conviction in my daughter's voice. With a deep breath, she finally found her voice. Well, she remarked with a hint of sarcasm. It appears the apple didn't stray far from the tree. A soft chuckle escaped my lips. No, it didn't happen that way, I concurred. Then my smile became more pointed. However, I planned to maintain that apple on the tree. Mom remained silent, yet I could sense her breath on the other end of the line, a blend of acceptance and encouragement. She understood me deeply, recognizing that I wouldn't allow this to pass without action. We continued our conversation for a few more minutes before saying our goodbyes. The following day, Rachel received her summons. I was certain of her location, in her workspace, reveling in the warmth that her relationship with Walter had bestowed upon her. She had anticipated this without question, She understood that I wouldn't just accept this without a fight. However, understanding and experiencing are distinctly separate matters. Initially, she exhibited a sense of tranquility. I envisioned she had anticipated the typical divorce conditions. 50% of all things. A straightforward separation, perhaps some financial support to ensure her well-being. She likely assumed I would follow a familiar pattern. She was mistaken. As she perused the documents, her demeanor shifted noticeably. Her fingers quivered ever so slightly as she flipped through the pages. And then, in an instant, it came into view. The overwhelming sense of dread. The awakening. She possessed nothing. The dwelling. Not under my banner. She possessed no right to it. What about the furniture? Furthermore, it does not belong to her. Spousal support. Not a chance. Our salaries were almost the same. All she received was child support. And that was only for 2 more years until Sophia reached the age of 18. She must have perused the articles repeatedly, wishing she had overlooked a detail. She believed there was a gap she could take advantage of. Yet there was emptiness. I had ensured that was the case. Before too long, my phone began to ring. I allowed it to ring twice before picking up, my tone steady. Greetings? This situation lacks fairness. Rachel's voice pierced the air, filled with urgency and distress. I am entitled to 50% of all assets. This is the way it operates, Aaron. I reclined in my chair, a smile playing on my lips. I remarked, my voice playful, nearly filled with laughter. Indeed, she snapped. I once held the title of your wife. I am entitled to 50%. A gentle sigh escaped my lips. With careful consideration, I responded, and I am meant to receive half of yours. The line was eerily quiet. I could vividly imagine the cogs whirring in her mind, the understanding dawning upon her. I beamed with joy. It would be best to resolve this matter in a legal setting. The long-awaited day of the divorce hearing had finally come. I entered the courtroom alongside my attorney, Ron Jeremy, who, as usual, wore a self-satisfied grin. A predator in formal attire. He flourished in circumstances like this, and I was certain he was on the brink of relishing every second of it. Moments later, Rachel made her entrance alongside her attorney, Lana Rhodes. The instant Ron laid eyes on her, he wet his lips and whispered to himself, I'm going to take her down. I glanced at him, arching an eyebrow in curiosity. Likewise, I uttered without a second thought. Ron shot me a sidelong look before breaking into a smirk. I was referring to the courtroom. He explained, yet the sparkle in his eyes revealed that we both understood we were on the same page. A wave of embarrassment washed over me, yet the ridiculousness of the situation nearly brought a smile to my face. As the judge stepped into the courtroom, a profound silence enveloped the room, halting all discussions. Lana rose with poise, her demeanor polished and collected as she spoke to the judge. Your Honor, my client's spouse has declined to provide any alimony or propose a settlement to her. We are asserting our claim to 50% of all his assets, as is justly entitled to her under marital law. The judge hardly had a moment to respond before Ron rose to his feet, adjusting his suit with a deliberate grace as he began to speak. Your Honor, my client's spouse has likewise denied him half of her assets and has chosen not to offer any settlement. The judge scowled, moving his eyes back and forth between us. Could you clarify what you mean? Ron ambled over to the bench with a relaxed gait. Indeed, Your Honor, their salaries are almost indistinguishable. I find myself at a bit of a crossroads. Should I advocate for my client to receive alimony or suggest that they provide it instead? The judge cast a glance at both Rachel and me, then let out a sharp breath. If both individuals earn the same income, then neither is eligible for alimony. Rachel's body stiffened, her fingers curling tightly into fists on the table. Before any objections could escape her lips, Lana swiftly interjected. Your Honor, my client wishes to inform you that Ethan has depleted their joint account, leaving a mere $2 behind. Ron remained completely unfazed. Indeed, he appeared utterly thrilled. He advanced with a fluid grace. That is precisely what my client's spouse added to that account. A moment of silence lingered. The judge faced Rachel, his demeanor filled with anticipation. Is there anything more? Lana paused for a moment before giving a slight nod. Indeed, Your Honor, we must also address the issue of child custody. Before she could utter another syllable, Ron interjected seamlessly, his tone brimming with assurance. We have proposed full custody to the other party. My client prefers to forego visitation, and we will maintain child support payments for the next 2 years until she reaches 18. Sophia inhaled sharply, her voice trembling as she called out, "Please don't go, Dad. I am your child." I chose not to glance back at her. My jaw clenched, my hands balled in a fist beneath the table. Yet, I maintained my gaze ahead. I had come to a conclusion, and it was essential for me to follow it to the end. Yet, the judge shifted his focus toward Sophia. His demeanor became gentler as he motioned in her direction. "Do you have something to share? Kindly step forward." Sophia paused briefly, gathering her thoughts before approaching the witness stand. She appeared diminutive, fragile. As she finally found her voice, it trembled slightly. "Indeed, I was unaware that my father harbored no love for me." Before she could proceed, Ron rose to his feet, smoothing his suit with deliberate grace. "If it pleases the court, may I pose a few inquiries to the young lady?" Lana swiftly voiced her disagreement. "Your Honor, she is merely a young girl." The judge lifted a hand to bring quiet to the room. "Allow it to unfold," he remarked. "Go ahead, Mr. Jeremy." Ron moved closer to Sophia. "Dear young lady, do you hold affection for your father?" Sophia wiped her nose, then gave a small nod. "Absolutely." Ron returned the nod. "Do you hold your father in high regard?" Another whiff. "Absolutely." A moment of stillness hung in the air before Ron posed his next question. "What is the reason behind your parents' divorce?" Sophia's lip quivered. "My mother's former partner has come back from Europe, and now they wish to reunite. Thus, she is parting ways with him." Ron inclined his head just a bit. "This suggests that your mother may not have had deep feelings for your father, or perhaps she held stronger affections for her previous partner." Sophia parted her lips, yet silence enveloped her. She fixed her gaze on Ron, then let it drift to the floor as an oppressive silence enveloped the courtroom. Sophia shifted restlessly, her face marked by tears as she looked back and forth between him and me. I remained steadfast in my decision not to face her. My hand stayed neatly folded. This moment, this precise moment, was what I had long anticipated. "So go ahead and share, Sophia," Ron urged. "Did you feel upset about your father's marriage ending?" Sophia paused, uncertainty flickering in her mind. Her eyes flicked toward me, probing for a hint of emotion, yet I remained an enigma, offering nothing in return. She glanced back at Ron, her lips quivering slightly. Then, softly, she confessed no. "I felt joy for my mother." Ron arched an eyebrow. "Glad for your mother?" Sophia gave a slight nod, her breath hitching softly. "Absolutely." Ron let out a breath through his nostrils, stroking his chin as if deep in contemplation. "I understand. So, Sophia, were you indifferent to your father's feelings regarding all of this? Were you okay with the divorce?" She brushed away her tears with the back of her hand. "Absolutely. Mom was destined to be with her one true love." Ron emitted a soft whistle, shaking his head in disbelief. "Incredible. Genuine affection." He took a moment to walk back and forth, then halted, locking his gaze with Sophia's. "All right, Sophia, let me clarify this. You showed little regard for your father's emotions. You requested that he not halt this divorce. You urged him to simply release your mother. You thought he would let go of his wife and find a way forward, as your mother truly deserved happiness." Sophia bit her lip, her breath coming in quick, uneven gasps. "Indeed," she murmured. Ron's face grew stern. He moved in a bit, softening his tone, ensuring that each word resonated deeply. "So, Sophia, what makes you think he should have any concern for you?" Sophia's silence resonated with an overwhelming intensity. The courtroom, once alive with murmurs and furtive looks, now resembled a void. Each breath calculated, each heartbeat distinct. She gazed at Ron, her eyes wide and lips slightly parted, as though the gravity of his words had just stolen the breath from her lungs. Ron, always decisive, leaned slightly forward, his voice clear and unwavering. "Now, I have one last question for you, Sophia." He allowed the moment to linger, letting the tension build to a palpable peak. "This is precisely what you conveyed to your father, verbatim. Allow me to cite him." Ron glanced at me for a moment before shifting his attention back to her. "If Walter had stayed, your mother would have become his wife, and you would have been his child. That would have been the ideal situation, wouldn't it?" He allowed the words to linger in the atmosphere. In that moment, his gaze captured hers. Your response was, indeed, reminiscent of a storybook love tale. Sophia took a deep breath. Ron advanced with confidence, his voice steady. "Is that accurate, Sophia?" She paused, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. Yet, there was no escape, no refuge from the truth she had so effortlessly articulated earlier. Indeed, she ultimately confessed. Ron nodded, as though that response was everything he required. Yet, he had more to say. "You longed to be Walter's daughter. You considered leaving behind the father who kept vigil through the night while you battled the fever last year. The father who attended every recital, participated in every parent-teacher meeting, and cheered at every sports event." Sophia tightly closed her eyes, attempting to shut out his words. Yet he pressed on, unyielding. "You were ready to leave behind the very man who ensured you had your roller skates, all while he continued to wear the same 3 shirts to the office for the past 2 years." He shook his head, his voice tinged with disbelief. "The very person who, at this moment, is providing you with precisely what you desire, a family with Walter and your mother." He allowed the silence to envelop them again, letting its heaviness bear down on her. With a final question hanging in the air, he struck the decisive blow. "What's the issue with that?" Sophia collapsed in despair, her body trembling as she wept without restraint. "I apologize, Dad." She gasped through her sobs. "I wasn't in the right frame of mind. Kindly, do not leave me behind." In that courtroom, I sensed my composure beginning to waver for the very first time. My throat constricted, and for a fleeting moment, my sight became hazy. I longed to reach out to her, to embrace her, to assure her of my unwavering presence. Yet, I found myself unable to do so. I needed to remain resolute. I tightened my jaw and maintained a stiff posture, battling the tempest that threatened to erupt within me. The judge, observing the whole interaction with keen attention, finally let out a breath and faced Sophia. "That's enough, young lady," he said, his tone now gentler. "Please feel free to take a step back." Sophia dabbed at her tear-stained cheeks, her footsteps soft as she returned to her seat, her sobs subdued yet lingering in the air. Then the judge fixed his intense stare on Lana. "Ms. Rhodes," he remarked, his voice tinged with a hint of frustration. "I think Mr. Jeremy cut in on your conversation earlier. Please proceed." Lana rose to her feet, a familiar air of self-satisfaction evident on her expression. "I appreciate it, Your Honor." She adjusted her blazer and took a moment to clear her throat. "My client and her fiancé have decided against pursuing custody of the child. They are tying the knot and prefer that the child not be present." The courtroom was enveloped in a profound silence. The judge's face flushed a vivid crimson. His eyes darted to Rachel, who sat rigidly, steering clear of anyone's stare. Sophia, upon hearing those words, fell apart even more. The sound of her crying enveloped the room, raw and agonizing, slicing through the silence with a sharp intensity. The judge massaged his temples, his expression one of utter frustration. He then shifted his gaze towards me. "Mr. Taylor," he said, his voice laden with exasperation, "you have no desire for custody. Your spouse is not interested in custody arrangements. What are the two of you up to? Your pride and self-importance will ruin this child's future." I took a deep breath, collecting my thoughts before rising to my feet. "Your Honor, my mother, Brenda Thomas, is prepared to assume custody. I have already had a conversation with her, and she has committed to taking full responsibility for Sophia." The judge regarded me intently for a prolonged moment before finally nodding in acknowledgement. With a decisive strike, he brought his gavel down upon the bench. "The child will be placed in the care of Mrs. Margaret Evans," he stated. "Child support will be the responsibility of both parents." He took a moment of silence before proceeding. "Alimony and settlements are unnecessary. The divorce has been finalized." The gavel struck the wood with a resonant finality, its echo reverberating through the courtroom, marking an undeniable conclusion. I glanced at Ron, who had been observing the whole interaction with an amused look on his face. He emitted a soft laugh and leaned in closer to me. "That," he murmured with a grin, "was the quickest divorce ever recorded in human history." Once the court session concluded, I headed over to my mother. Sophia sat beside her, her head lowered, tears continuing to flow down her cheeks. My mother placed a gentle hand on her back, rubbing slow circles in an effort to provide comfort. Yet Sophia's sobs persisted unabated. I inhaled deeply and settled beside her. For a moment, I simply observed her tears, sensing the heaviness of all that had transpired resting upon me. Then, gently, I uttered my words. "Darling," I stated, my tone steady yet resolute. "Our reality is far from a fairy tale. We exist in the tangible realm." Sophia raised her head a fraction, her puffy eyes locking onto mine. She held back tears, remaining silent. "Leaving you was never my intention." I pressed on. "Yet, I wanted you to grasp the depth of the pain when those dear to you choose to walk away. As if you're just an old pair of sneakers, worn out and thrown away." She recoiled at my words, new tears welling in her eyes. It was clear she had objections, yet she chose to hold her tongue, absorbing the moment in quiet contemplation. We often overlook the contributions others have made on our behalf, assuming it was simply their obligation to assist us. I continued forward, my eyes unwavering. And in exchange, we believe they merit nothing, neither affection, nor appreciation, nor even fundamental regard. Sophia dabbed at her nose with the cuff of her sweater. Her lips quivered, yet she was taking in every word. "Love is a reciprocal journey," I expressed to her. "What you offer in love, you shall receive in return. Show respect, and it will be returned to you. However, when you spread negativity, you can expect negativity to come back to you." She inhaled sharply, her fingers entwined firmly in her lap. "I have always loved you," I murmured, my voice now gentle. Yet, what I received in exchange was nothing but disgrace. It pained me deeply, Sophia, more than you could ever understand. Her breath caught in her throat, and she averted her gaze, filled with embarrassment. "If I had allowed you to walk over me today, you would have done the same to someone else in the future," I told her. "Not everyone will share my perspective. Not everyone will simply turn their back. There may come a time when your actions cause pain to someone who won't simply accept it. They will return the same level of humiliation, perhaps even exceeding it." Sophia shut her eyes, her petite figure quivering. Then in a whisper so soft I nearly overlooked it, she said, "No, that wouldn't be good." She reopened her eyes, gazing at me with a depth of sorrow I had never witnessed before. "Forgive me, Dad," she murmured softly. In that moment, she leaped into my arms, enveloping me in a warm, tight embrace. Her body trembled against me as she pressed her face into my chest, crying more intensely than ever. I embraced her tightly, sensing her anguish, her remorse, her grief, all of it spilling forth in that instant. After a brief pause, Sophia gently raised her head from my chest. Her face bore the marks of sorrow, with tears tracing down her cheeks and her eyes puffy and crimson. Yet, there was an unmistakable shift in the depth of her gaze now. A gentle touch, infused with contemplation. She dabbed at her tears with the back of her hand, glancing up at me with a mix of uncertainty and vulnerability. "What about Mother?" she inquired, her tone delicate and hesitant. I let out a breath, a melancholic smile playing at the edges of my mouth. I anticipated this question would arise sooner or later. I leaned in and softly tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear before I began to speak. "Well," I remarked, "she made her decision to leave me behind, to leave you behind, and to continue with her life. Sophia's lower lip quivered, yet her gaze remained steadfast. This was something she had to hear. All we can do at this point is allow destiny to take its course, I went on. It's futile to pursue someone who has no intention of remaining. However, do you realize? We ought to cherish the fact that we still have one another. She furrowed her brow, seeking clarity, prompting me to provide further details. Consider it from this perspective, I suggested softly. She never genuinely cared for me. Thus, she saved me from the deception of a false existence. As difficult as it may be, she left you as well, which ultimately saved you from the illusion of hope. We are confronted with the essence of reality. Only honesty, no deceit, simply the reality. Sophia's eyes glistened with new tears, yet this time, they held a deeper understanding. She bit her lip, and then, without warning, she leaned forward and embraced me once more, holding on tightly, as if fearing to release her grip. "Thank you, Dad," she murmured. As the months unfolded, life gradually found its own steady cadence. Sophia started to smile more, finding her own path to healing, and our connection deepened. It wasn't flawless, as nothing truly is, but we had one another, and that sufficed. On a splendid afternoon, Sophia flung open the front door, her face radiating pure excitement. As I lounged on the couch, engrossed in the newspaper, she burst through the door. "I just came across something unbelievable," she exclaimed, struggling to hold back her excitement. I placed the paper aside and faced her, arching an eyebrow in curiosity. "Excuse me?" She smiled broadly. "That Walter fellow, he really hurt Mom badly." In an instant, I found myself utterly taken aback. Then, before I could hold back, a brief, amused chuckle escaped me. Though it wasn't something I took pride in, the events that unfolded left me with no other choice. Sophia's eyes grew wide at my response. But soon, as the ridiculousness of the situation settled in, she couldn't help but let out a soft laugh. "Did you see that coming?" she inquired, her head shaking in disbelief. A sly smile crept across my face. "I spent nearly 20 years married to your mother. I can attest that enduring her complaints daily feels like a unique form of torment." I reclined, folding my arms across my chest. I suppose their story was crafted by the Brothers Grimm. Sophia chuckled a bit more at that, but then her demeanor turned serious. "How is she doing?" she inquired. "She mentioned it while in the hospital. And what about Walter? He is currently incarcerated." I let out a breath through my nostrils, giving a nod. "Statistics." Sophia inclined her head ever so slightly. I sensed that a call from her is on the horizon. Just as I was preparing to reply, Laura emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel. She had been preparing dinner, yet now her gaze shifted between us, filled with curiosity. "Have I overlooked anything?" she inquired. Sophia glanced at her, a gentle, understanding smile gracing her lips. "No," she replied. "There was nothing you overlooked, Mom." Dear audience, we invite you to express your opinions in the comment section below. Also, remember to like, share, and subscribe.